What if the golden domes of Istanbul whispered secrets no historian dares to repeat? Behind the glittering grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, its soaring minarets, lush gardens, and flowing silks, there existed a hidden world, one rarely spoken of, often overlooked, and nearly forgotten by history. It was a world filled with both wonder and sorrow, where young boys, some barely older than children, were taken from obscurity and transformed into symbols of beauty, elegance, and elite. Desire. These boys weren't soldiers defending borders, nor servants waiting on royal whims. They were called Yamax male concubines, whose lives were shaped by the strange blend of admiration and control that ruled the imperial court. These boys were taken from different regions, often captives from conquered territories or the sons of poor families who hoped to find fortune. They were groomed in the art of seduction, charm, and performance. They were trained to entertain, to please, to represent refinement, and, quietly, to satisfy desires that few dared to speak of publicly. Their existence was complicated. On one hand, they lived among the empire's elite, surrounded by luxury, art, and education. They had access to the finest clothes, the best tutors, and the most refined intellectual training. On the other hand, they were never truly free. They were commodities prized for their beauty and youth, but often trapped in a gilded cage, forced to play roles not of their own choosing. Their beauty was adored, but their autonomy was not. Every smile could hide the weight of expectations. Every silk robe could be a kind of invisible chain. This isn't just a detail tucked away in history's footnotes. It's a deeply human story, one about affection complicated by power, beauty used as currency, and the fragile place of those caught between status and subjugation. The lives of these boys were shaped by forces they couldn't control, yet they endured, they mattered, and sometimes they loved in ways that defied the constraints of the world they inhabited. When we think of the word harem, images of veiled women lounging in marble chambers may come to mind, but this is only half the story. Across Persia, ancient Greece, Imperial China, and even in the mighty Ottoman Empire, men and boys were also desired. They were cherished not merely for companionship, but for their appearance, grace, and what they could offer in private. Their beauty was not only appreciated, it was worshipped, revered, and often turned into a symbol of elite masculinity. In the heart of the Topkapi Palace, there existed a hidden society, a gilded cage filled with hand-picked boys from across the empire. Some came from poor families seeking fortune, others were captives from conquered territories. But once inside, they were no longer children. They were transformed into ornaments of status. Their very existence became a reflection of the empire's wealth, power, and taste. These boys lived luxuriously, but their lives were always under the watchful eye of the Sultan and the court. They were trained in music, poetry, calligraphy, politics, and the subtle rules of seduction. They were taught how to charm, to please, and to perform for the court, becoming not just companions, but embodiments of sophistication. In fact, their very presence was a statement of elite taste, a symbol of the Sultan's refined masculinity and wealth. The Sultan, often surrounded by these beautiful young men, would have them perform for his amusement. Showering them with gifts and attention, Venetian diplomat Benedetto Romeriti reported that as many as 500 boys, aged 8 to 20, lived within the palace walls. They were not hidden in shame. No, they were celebrated. Their very presence was a statement of elite taste and masculine sophistication. The palace adorned its halls with the beauty and grace of these youths, their talents and their allure becoming a reflection of the Sultan's wealth and power. But don't mistake admiration for safety. Behind every silk curtain, there was surveillance. Behind every gesture of affection, there was the weight of control. The Yamax were commodity symbols of beauty to be bought, admired, and then discarded when their age or charm faded. Yet many of them were adored like gods. Some Yamax were granted tax exemptions, others received political appointments, and some were even raised to positions of importance. Many were elevated from poverty to power, their very existence symbolizing the elite nature of the empire. To outsiders, It might have seemed like paradise. But what does it mean to live in a golden cage, where love is both demanded but never truly given freely? What does it mean to live surrounded by beauty and luxury, but never be allowed to escape? The constraints of your role? This golden era began to unravel in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Ottomans opened their gates to Western diplomacy, which brought with it new technologies, railways, and guns. But it also brought something far more insidious: Western morality, a new lens through which love, gender, and desire were judged. With the advent of Western ideals and the pressures of modernity, Ottoman society began to shift. In 1858, the Ottoman Penal Code was introduced. Suddenly, the love that had once adorned palaces became criminal. Public affection between men was considered an act of indecency. Men suspected of same-sex affection were hunted, beaten in the streets, and humiliated. The once celebrated love between men faded into the shadows. Public affection between men was no longer tolerated, and it became taboo to even speak of it. What had once been a sign of elite refinement was now condemned as immoral. The age of tolerance collapsed under the weight of imported Western shame. The Yamax, once a symbol of luxury and sophistication, disappeared from the public eye. The poems that celebrated them stopped. The portraits disappeared. The songs that once whispered their beauty were silenced. The very existence of the male concubine was erased, as though they had never been. Ottoman writer Ahmed Shevdat Pasha lamented, "Woman lovers have increased, while boy beloveds have disappeared. It is as if the people of Lot have been swallowed by the earth." And just like that, an entire era vanished, leaving only a faint echo in the distant chambers of history. But history always leaves a trail. Not everyone let history decide the ending. Tahir and Tib, whose love began in captivity and blossomed against all odds, refused to surrender to silence. When their Christian captives were imprisoned for their affection, the two Ottoman youths waited. Did the unthinkable: they converted to Islam? Not for salvation, not for power, but for love. It was an act of rebellion, a refusal to let politics, religion, or social norms dictate who they could love. Their act wasn't just about reunion, it was about defiance, a refusal to let history erase their love. They knew the risks, but defied them anyway, because even as empires rose and fell, even as laws hardened and hearts closed, love true. Defiant love still found a way. The story of the Ottoman male concubine is not merely one of decadence or moral collapse. It is the story of how societies define love and how those definitions can be both liberating and lethal. These boys were not merely victims, they were survivors. Survivors of a world that adored them, and yet ultimately destroyed them. Their memories echo in forgotten corridors, in poems unsung, in shadows cast by domes and towers. We remember them. Now, not as curiosities, but as human beings caught in the crossfire of history. So, was this hidden world a symbol of sophistication, or a tragedy wrapped in silk? Perhaps it was both. Their existence challenges our understanding of love, power, and human resilience. The male concubines of the Ottoman Empire were not mere symbols of decadence. They were part of a world that cherished beauty and power, but also silenced those who dared to love freely. Their story reminds us that even in the most glittering corners of the past, there were lives full of beauty and torment, unspoken and unforgotten. Through their whispers, we uncover a forgotten part of history, and in doing so, we come to realize that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be uncovered.